Strange Experience on a Remote Beach by Walden S. In 2016, I was camping in my troopy, which if you don't know because you're not from Australia, is basically a jeep. I was around the Daintree area. On the night of my 21st birthday, my partner and I decided to go to the beach, Thornton Beach, and smoke a joint, which I've realized was probably pretty dumb because of the crocodiles. It's a fairly remote beach, backing onto a rainforest with a few buildings down the southern end. We're just sitting there, setting up our stuff by the tree line in the shadows, and just enjoying the moonlight and chatting, having a smoke when we hear two twigs break and leaves start to crunch. We both spring around and look behind us, walking backwards towards the beach. When we don't see anything, we assume it was just an animal or a bird, and we walk a few meters down the coast to carry on the night. Maybe 10-15 seconds later, after we sat down, a man walked out of the rainforest from where we were previously sitting and made a beeline for the water. We weren't expecting to see another person, so we shuffled back up the beach to the safety of the shadows. The man removed his shirt and started rolling around in the water shallows. It was pretty strange, but, to each their own, I guess. He does this for about 5 minutes before he gets up, stands in the water, faces the ocean for probably another 5 minutes, then turns around. He's looking in our direction and takes a few steps forward. He bends down, picks up what I assume is a coconut, which causes my partner to stiffen up a little bit. He stood there with the coconut, staring at us for quite some time. We're unsure of what to actually do here. We were pretty positive he couldn't see us in the shadows, but we're starting to doubt it. I could sense my partner beginning to gear up. He'd felt around for a big stick behind him and whispered that if he came too close to us, get ready to run. After another 3 to 5 minutes, the man drops the coconut and returns to the beach. We start rising, and my partner grabs the stick, but the man walks past us back into the rainforest. We booked it, back down to the beach, to the car where we were parked, and got the heck out of there. We got all the way back to our freaking campsite in record time, honestly, feeling pretty damn rattled. We've concluded that maybe he was on ecstasy, or maybe overheating or dehydrated, so perhaps that's why he was rolling around in the water. We honestly don't know, but I don't really want to know. Glowing Orbs at Camp Hero by Anonymous. I've just stumbled upon this show, and thoroughly enjoy a lot of the experiences and stories others have shared on it. I finally felt compelled to share an experience of my own. And while it may not be as provoking or profound as some of the stories told on this show, it honestly still fills me with strange and mysterious feelings all these years later. I grew up on Long Island in the state of New York. My older sister, her boyfriend, and I often walked the trails and the beaches at night. One evening, we were walking at Camp Hero State Park. It was a full moon, so it was very bright out. As we were walking the trail, we stopped to relax and looked over the water. My sister's boyfriend sparked up a joint and we all were partaking and relaxing. While gazing out onto the open water, we spotted a small light in the distance. My sister inquired what we thought it might be. Her boyfriend said it was probably just a light on a distant boat. I agreed, but we didn't know much about it. However, as the moments passed, we noticed the light approaching us, getting closer by the minute. As it moved closer, it appeared to be above the water, in the sky, not on the water floating. We soon realized it was not light on a distant boat. We continued speculating about what it could be, and I concluded that it had to be someone's small drone. But as the light came closer and closer, the brightness got stronger and more intense. If you know Camp Hero, you know that there are cliff edges that hang over the water. We were standing on the edge with this orb approaching us. Within 5 minutes, the orb was no longer in the distance. It was hanging in front of us. It was not over the water, but somewhat over the sandy beach. We just stood there, staring at it in awe. It had a whitish purple glow. Despite being nighttime, it was bright out due to the light of the full moon. On this high visibility evening, it became evident that there was no drone. This light was standing with no machinery attached, and it just hung about 10 feet in front of us for about 30 seconds. It then disappeared so that it almost seemed to envelop itself. We all decided to get the hell out of there, and that was it. This was back sometime in 2015. I've visited the park numerous times since then, and I've never seen anything remotely close to it. Maybe we were all just a bunch of stoned teenagers and it was a group delusion or something. But I've done my fair share of weed and that's never happened. That night will stick with me forever. The park itself is shrouded in mystery, and I can only speculate that the orb was a remnant of one of those experiments conducted at Camp Hero back in the day. Creepy Brighton Beach Story by Anonymous. So we're gonna have to go back to the early 90s for this one. When I lived out in Brooklyn. In 1992, I moved out from rural Ohio to the Big Apple to pursue my dreams of being an artist. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done, but I have few regrets in life. Living in New York City was one of the happiest, most exciting times. Although I had little money, I had many friends and good stories because of my time there, as well as some not-so-great stories too. Anyway, I lived in a place in Brooklyn called Brighton Beach. Many of you will be very familiar with the area because, according to my kid anyway, it's a place you start in the video game GTA 4. It's right next to Coney Island and has a bunch of above-ground railways over the streets and water. It's actually the same place where the car chase scene takes place in that old French Connection movie. Brighton Beach is more commonly known as Little Odessa or Little Russia because of the large amount of Eastern European immigration here. Russian-speaking people had been flocking here since the 1970s, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the level of immigration went through the roof. Nowadays, it's not entirely uncommon to see stores or restaurants in Brighton Beach with Russian characters on them, such as Cyrillic, I believe it's called. And much like any group of people who emigrated to the United States, they brought along their customs, their religions, and, most significant to the story, their organized crime. So, I had this buddy when I lived out in Brooklyn, one I often used to hang out with. One day, we were walking past this Russian cafe when a fight spills into the street. These Russian guys are kicking the crap out of these American guys, like really putting the hurt to them. My buddy and I are just watching from across the street, gawping like people usually do whenever there's a street fight. The American guys start running away, and this one Russian guy pulls out something from his shirt. It looked like something that I couldn't tell at first, but then I could tell quickly from the loud noise it produced that it was a gun, and they started shooting after the fleeing American guys. He had ripped off his shirt in the scuffle, and I noticed that he had all these tattoos all over his chest and back. Pictures of those domes they have in Russian churches, all of these other religious iconography, and he had these 2 stars on each of his shoulders, like an old-style design that reminded me of those directional pointers on maps. We just kept walking before the Russian guys caught us staring, and I thought that would be the end of it. But my buddy was pretty fascinated by the tattoos. In a spur-of-the-moment decision, he got himself a pair of shoulder stars similar to the kind the Russian guy had on him. Admittedly, they did look pretty cool, and I understand why my buddy wanted to show them off during the following summer. But when he did, we found some pretty weird things would happen whenever we were out in public. For example, once we went to this little Pelemini place we always visited. Pelemini are like these little dumpling type things, and I'm probably spelling them and saying them wrong, but they're really cheap and I really like them. They're super filling, and they made up a big chunk of our diet back in the day, especially when I lived in Brooklyn. Anyway, we eat a bunch of dumplings, we drink a few shots of cheap vodka, and then go to pay the check. The service had been extra good that day, and we intended to tip them what little we could. But the owners wouldn't take our money, no matter how much we insisted. The guy behind the counter just laughed nervously and kept pushing our hands away while talking to my buddy with the tattoos in Russian. Now, we were definitely broke enough not to refuse a free meal, so we just kind of went on our way and didn't really overthink it. But as the weeks went by, stuff like that kept happening. People would randomly speak Russian to my buddy and act skittish around him. While we didn't know why, I remember having a hunch that maybe it had something to do with those tattoos. A hunch that was confirmed with one of the Russian-speaking incidents turned pretty nasty. This big bear of a guy walks up to my buddy and greets him warmly in Russian. my buddy says, "Sorry, I don't speak Ruski." The dude's expression changes entirely. He starts poking my buddy real hard where his tattoos are, speaking angrily in Russian the whole time. Whoever was with him only barely restrained him from kicking my buddy's butt, and we were left confused and frightened. After that, my buddy didn't show off his tattoos so much anymore. He didn't have them on for much longer, honestly. Not because he had them removed, but the whole tattoo removal expensive back then was just like not what it is today. He didn't have them much longer because he got a knock on his apartment door one day. He answered, and these big guys in tracksuits burst through the door, grabbing him and forcing his shirt off. Then with the help of hot clothes irons, they burned and cut those things off of his shoulders. There was nothing but raw flesh left. I remember going to visit him in the hospital, and he told me the gist of what happened. There weren't too many details. I just put that together myself. It was the most horrifying thing I think I had ever heard, and as you can imagine, my buddy was traumatized. His parents had to pay his hospital bills, and he moved back to Vermont to live with them. After that, I stayed well away from the Russian cafes, and stayed away from any large Russian man in a tracksuit. Honestly, I didn't really know there was Russian mafia in the Brighton Beach area, and I don't know if they're still there today, but be careful out there, and don't get tattoos just because you think they're cool. Definitely know what they mean. Man Found Dead on the Beach by SD News. In a heart-wrenching incident that has shocked the local community, a Houston man lost his life after being trapped beneath his pickup truck on Crystal Beach. The Galveston County Sheriff's Department reported that the unfortunate victim, John Raymond Wilson, who was 37 years old, of the 2000 block of Fenwick, Houston, succumbed to his tragic accident after the truck settled into the sand, immobilizing him. John Raymond Wilson had been enjoying an evening of surf fishing near Voigt on Monday night. Surf fishing, a popular recreational activity, often draws enthusiasts to the tranquil and scenic beaches along the Gulf of Mexico. According to Lieutenant Tommy Hansen of the Galveston County Sheriff's Department, it is believed that Wilson might have been fishing before deciding to rest under his truck for some reason. It appears he may have been fishing, that he got under the truck to lay down, and it sank and got on top of him and he couldn't get out, Lieutenant Hansen explained. This incident underscores the unforeseen dangers that can arise from seemingly innocuous actions, especially in dynamic environments like sandy beaches. Witnesses at the scene noted that Wilson arrived at the beach around 9 p.m. on Monday evening, which was approximately 90 minutes before the scheduled low tide under a full moon, as reported by the National Weather Service. The full moon, while providing a serene and illuminated night, also brings out higher and lower tides due to its gravitational pull. This may have contributed to the truck's instability and subsequent settling into the soft sand. The critical discovery was made early Tuesday morning when the truck was spotted in the surf following the high tide. The high tide likely exacerbated the situation, submerging the vehicle partially and making it more conspicuous to passerbys. Concerned citizens who saw the truck in the surf promptly reported it, leading to the dispatch of a tow truck to the location. The tow truck driver, arriving with the intent to pull the vehicle from the surf, encountered an unexpected and grim reality. They discovered before they could even move the vehicle a foot or so there was a body under it, Lieutenant Hansen recounted. This revelation transformed what seemed like a routine vehicle recovery into a tragic scene, confirming the fatal outcome of the accident. The Galveston County Sheriff's Department, while investigating the incident, found no immediate evidence suggesting foul play. There is nothing to indicate foul play, Hansen emphasized, pointing towards a tragic accident rather than a criminal act. To ascertain the exact cause of death, an autopsy has been scheduled. The autopsy will provide detailed insights into the circumstances surrounding Wilson's death, including whether he sustained any injuries while trying to free himself or if the factors contributed to his demise. This tragic event has sent ripples of sorrow through both the local and wider community. Surf fishing and beach outings, typically associated with relaxation and enjoyment, now carry a little bit of a somber reminder of nature's unpredictable dangers. It serves as a poignant reminder for beachgoers to exercise caution and be aware of their surroundings, especially when interacting with heavy machinery or vehicles in variable terrains. In memory of John Raymond Wilson, the community reflects on the need for increased awareness and safety measures to prevent such unfortunate incidents in the future. His untimely death serves as a sobering lesson about the delicate balance between enjoying nature's beauty and respecting its potential hazards. John's passing is a profound loss, felt deeply by those who knew him and by the broader community. As investigations continue and the autopsy results are awaited, the focus remains on understanding how such a tragedy could have occurred and on ensuring that similar incidents are prevented in the future. The Galveston County Sheriff's Department and the local community stand united in their grief to resolve and honor Wilson's memory through increased vigilance, safety awareness, and much more on Crystal Beach and beyond. The Missing People of Piha Beach. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the Wilson family arrived at Piha Beach. The family had been planning this trip for weeks, excited to spend the weekend enjoying the stunning black sand and the invigorating surf that the beach was famous for. Piha Beach, located on the western coast of New Zealand's North Island, was a favorite spot for locals and tourists alike. Known for its dramatic scenery, including the iconic Lion Rock, it was a place of natural beauty and adventure. Mike and Sarah Wilson, along with their two children, Lily and Max, decided that they would find a nice spot near the lifeguard tower. They weren't alone. Piha Beach was bustling with activity. Families played in the sand, surfers tackled the waves, and hikers explored the surrounding trails. By noon, the beach was usually at its busiest, and this day was no different. The lifeguards were vigilant, their eyes scanning the water for any sign of trouble. The day seemed perfect, a testament to the simple joys of life. But as the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, the atmosphere would soon shift into unsettling directions. It started with a scream. At first, it was faint, almost blending in with the sounds of the ocean and laughter itself. But it grew louder, more desperate. Sarah looked up from her book and saw a woman frantically waving her arms, pointing towards the water. A crowd began to gather at the shoreline, and the lifeguards sprang into action. Someone had gone missing in the surf. Mike grabbed Max and pulled him close while Sarah held tightly onto Lily. They watched as the lifeguards swam out, their red and yellow uniforms stark against the deep blue water. Minutes felt like hours as the search continued. Eventually, the lifeguards returned, empty-handed and exhausted. Whispers spread through the crowd. Someone had disappeared without a trace. The missing person was identified as Tom Hensley, a local who was known for his strong swimming abilities. His friends were in shock. It was as if he had been swallowed by the ocean. The news of Tom Hensley's disappearance spread quickly, casting a pall over the once lively beach. The Wilsons decided to stay the night at a nearby lodge, hoping the incident was an isolated one. That evening, they joined other concerned beachgoers at a local community center where a meeting had been called. Detective Emma Carter, a seasoned investigator from Auckland, addressed the worried crowd. "We are doing everything we can to find Tom," she assured. "However, the ocean is unpredictable and rescues can be challenging." Despite her words, the unease was palpable. This wasn't the first time someone had gone missing at Piha Beach, but it was the first time in some years. The community was tight-knit, and each loss was deeply felt. The following day, the Wilson family debated whether they should stay or leave. Ultimately, curiosity and a sense of solidarity kept them at Piha. The beach was noticeably quieter, with many opting to stay away. Those who did visit were cautious, keeping a close eye on the waves. A week or so passed, and then another disappearance occurred. This time, though, it was a tourist from Germany, a young woman named Anna Mueller. She had been hiking along the cliffs when she just vanished. Her friends reported seeing her one moment and then finding no trace of her. Detective Carter returned to Piha, her demeanor more serious. 2 disappearances in such a short span was alarming. She began to dig deeper, looking into old records and interviewing longtime residents of the area. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the beach, Detective Carter made a discovery. There had been a similar pattern of disappearances decades ago. In the 1970s, the cases were never solved, and the files were incredibly thin. But the circumstances were seriously scary. They were almost the exact same details that's happening right now. People vanishing without a trace near or on Piha Beach. Rumors began to surface about an old Maori legend associated with Piha Beach. According to the legend, the beach was guarded by a tanawa, a supernatural creature that resided in the waters and cliffs. Now, this creature was said to be the protector, but it was also a punisher, taking those who disrespected the land or the sea. Now, forgive me, I'm probably going to say this name terribly wrong. Elder Hemi Rangi, a respected Maori leader, was invited to speak to the community at large. He recounted the legend, emphasizing the need to respect the natural world. The tanawa is a guardian, but it also is a reminder of the balance we must maintain, he explained. Disrespect the land and you disrupt the harmony. While many dismissed the legend as just mere folklore, others couldn't quite ignore the pattern. The idea of a supernatural explanation, though unsettling, began to take root. Driven by the need to find answers, Detective Carter enlisted the help of marine biologists and geologists. They explored the possibility of underwater currents and hidden caves that could explain these disappearances. Divers searched the ocean floor, and drones were sent to scan the cliffs and the dense forest. One evening, Carter sat with Mike and Sarah Wilson, who had become deeply involved in the search efforts. "There's just something we're missing," she mused. "Something that ties all of this together." Sarah, who had been reading the history of Piha, suggested looking into the land's past ownership. "Maybe there's a clue who lived here before that we're missing," she offered. Their investigation led them to a man named Walter Hensley, Tom Hensley's great-grandfather. Walter had been a prominent figure in Piha's early days, known for his extensive knowledge of the land and sea. His journals, preserved by the family, contained detailed accounts of the area, including references to strange occurrences and warnings about the beach. In Walter Hensley's journals, Carter found a passage that stood out. It described a series of rituals performed by early settlers to appease the spirits of the land. These rituals, conducted in conjunction with the local Maori, were meant to ensure safe passage and harmony with the natural world. Over time, these practices have been forgotten. Carter, along with Elder Rangi and the community, decided to revive the old rituals in hopes of restoring balance. A ceremony was planned involving both traditional Maori practices and elements from Walter Hensley's journals. On the day of the ceremony, the community gathered at Piha Beach. Elder Rangi led the ritual, invoking the spirit of the tanawa and asking for his protection. Offerings were made and prayers were spoken. Days turned into weeks, and the beach slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The disappearances ceased altogether, and the sense of unease began to lift. The community remained vigilant but hopeful. One evening, as the Wilson family walked along the shore, they noticed something in the distance. It was a figure stumbling out of the water. As they rushed over, they recognized him. It was Tom Hensley, disoriented but alive. Tom's return was nothing short of a miracle, but his memory of the time he was missing was incredibly hazy. He spoke of strange dreams, an overwhelming sense of peace, as if he had been in another world despite his ordeal. He was entirely unharmed and looked like he had been fine, to be honest. The mystery of Piha Beach remains unsolved. While the community believes that the rituals and respect for the land played a big part in the ending of the disappearances, the true nature of what happened to those who vanished is still honestly unknown. Piha Beach continues to be a place of beauty and wonder, but also a reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and the natural world. The legend of the tanawa lives on, a guardian of the land and a symbol of the mysteries that lie beneath the surface of our understanding. The Wilson family returned to their daily lives, forever changed by their experience. They carried with them a deeper respect for the world around them and the stories that shape our connection to it. And as they looked out at the horizon, they knew that some mysteries were meant to remain a testament to the unseen forces that weave through our lives. Green Ridge State Forest Weirdness by Worth Shopping. Many years ago, my nephew and I embarked on a camping and fishing trip to Cumberland, Maryland. Known for its serene landscapes and natural beauty, we decided to stay at a state campground on the Potomac River, anticipating a tranquil and enjoyable experience away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The campground was kind of expensive, with campsites spread far apart, offering comfort and a bit of eerie seclusion. We chose the last campsite at the end of the campground, far away from the other campers, seeking a little bit of extra privacy. With its gentle flow, the Potomac River provided a soothing backdrop, and the forest surrounding us was alive with sounds of nature. We spent the day setting up camp, enjoying the simplicity of pitching the tent, arranging our gear, and gathering firewood. The weather was perfect, with a light breeze rustling the leaves and the sun casting dappled shadows through the canopy. We fished along the riverbank, chatting casually and enjoying the companionship such trips offer. As dusk settled in, we lit a campfire, its flickering flames casting a warm glow and a comforting circle of light in the encroaching darkness. The forest around us began to transition into night mode, with the sounds of birds gradually giving way to the calls of nocturnal creatures. Everything seemed normal, just the typical symphony of forest sounds. Then, around 10 or 11 at night, something unexpected happened. We heard the sound of a woman singing in the woods. Now, it was not a song with recognizable lyrics, but a hauntingly beautiful melody without words. The voice was clear, resonant, and carried through the trees, creating a mesmerizing and unsettling atmosphere. I glanced at my nephew sitting across the fire from me and saw that he was wide-eyed and tense. My dog, lying peacefully by the fire, suddenly sprang to his feet, ears perked up and staring intently into the darkness from where the sound seemed to emanate. His usual alertness to intruders or unusual activity made his reaction all the more concerning. "Did you hear that?" I asked my nephew, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, pale in the firelight, and responded, "I don't hear anything. I'm going to bed." His denial was unconvincing, given that he was only about 10 feet away from me and the singing was quite loud. He was clearly frightened, perhaps hoping it would disappear by ignoring it or something. The melody continued, weaving through the trees. While it sounded like it was coming from one direction, it had an eerie quality that made pinpointing its source very difficult. It was as if the voice was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Despite the unsettling nature of the sound, it did not feel threatening, if you will. There was no sense of malice, just a haunting beauty that was hard to describe. I suggested to my nephew that we take a flashlight and walk around to see if we could find the source of the singing, but he was adamant about staying put. The fear in his eyes was evident, and he quickly retreated into the tent, leaving me and the dog alone by the fire. For several minutes, the melody continued. I just stood there, listening intently, my dog by my side, both of us staring into the inky blackness of the woods. The fire crackled softly, a comforting but fragile barrier between us and the unknown. Then, as suddenly as it started, the singing just stopped. The forest was incredibly silent again, except for the occasional leaves rustling in the breeze. I felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. There was no way someone could have been hiding in the woods without my dog detecting them earlier. His calm, yet alert demeanor suggested that whatever it was, it did not pose an imminent threat, but it was definitely out of the ordinary. The following day, my nephew and I discussed it a little bit more. He finally admitted to hearing the singing but was too scared to acknowledge it. We tried to rationalize what we had experienced, considering the possibility of echoes, animals, or even just other campers. but nothing really seemed to fit the situation perfectly. In the following days, I searched for some similar experiences online in the Cumberland area, but I never really found anything conclusive. Our encounter has remained a mystery, a peculiar and unforgettable chapter in our camping adventures. The memory of that night lingered as a reminder of the many unexplained phenomena that occur in the depths of nature. Weird Rural Happenings by Safe Cold 5630. A few years back, I was driving down a country lane with my sister close to Christmas time in the UK. It was late at night, and we were going through a thick patch of woods. My car skidded around a corner and lost grip, sending us tumbling down into a ditch and into a farmer's field. Initially, we were both okay. However, the car's bumper had come off, and the wheel had flown off. We got out of the car and rang my boyfriend, who was at work and not answering. So we stood in the field for quite some time waiting for him to see his phone finally. At some point, a lovely average lady pulled over and said we should drive to the village and ask her husband to come back with a tow rope. About an hour passed and there was no sign of the woman or her husband. It was freezing cold. We kind of gave up after a while. Then a truck pulled up with two men speaking in a very thick accent who said they could pull the car out and help us out. The truck seemed well equipped, but everything in me told me not to let these men near us. Even though we were stranded and freezing with nothing but woods and fields for miles, we declined their offer and they drove off. About 10 minutes later they returned and said they couldn't leave us there and wanted to help. I was still on edge and the alarm bells rang, so I declined again. However, this time they didn't listen to me. They left their truck on and walked towards us. The next thing I really remember is a different man in a different vehicle pulling up, putting a tow rope on my car, and putting on a spare tire, making it drivable for the short distance to my boyfriend's workplace. This man was the husband of the previously mentioned woman. I had a bad pain in my shoulder, which was later diagnosed as a broken collarbone. However, I did not feel this until after. The adrenaline really had me pumping. I just remembered the man coming to help. Now, where I think this is weird is when the man pulled up, he said there was no truck. He said there wasn't two other people. It was just me and my friend in the field alone. What I don't understand is, were the men in the truck some sort of omen? Were they some sort of spirits? Angels, maybe? This man said that his wife had told him to come help, and he had left straight away, which in no way it couldn't have taken that much time. So, were we in some sort of time void? I don't even understand. And discussing it later, my sister has no memory of these two men, and only remembers waiting for this woman's husband to come. How has this happened? And why do I not remember what happened after they exited their car? My boyfriend and I are a young couple in their mid-college years. We decided that we wanted to get away from the work and our studies for the weekend, so we took a trip to the nearest hiking trail that is a part of the Appalachian Trail. We decided to leave on a Friday once I got off work and backpack up the trail to camp and stay there over the weekend. I work in a restaurant, and it's very difficult to have some time set aside to be able to leave work. I ended up leaving work around 4 p.m., but we said that no matter what, we would be going on this trip. We finally left for the trail, and we began hiking at around 5:30. My boyfriend was an Eagle Scout, so we had all the necessary supplies for a successful camping trip, and of course, necessary substances to free our minds after the long hike. The first part of the hike was absolutely exhausting. It was all uphill, and we were both carrying at least 40 pounds in our metal-framed backpacks. An hour later, we finally passed the first shelter. If not many of you know, a shelter on this trail is about a 10-foot by 15-foot log cabin that only has 3 walls, as it is open to the outside. It's specifically used as a shelter to sleep in or hide from the rain. Midway through the hike, it began to pour dramatically in the forest. Sooner or later, we were both soaked from head to toe. The thick fog grew quickly, as it had been hot and a humid day. The trail became very slippery, and our pace slowed down tremendously. We had hoped that we were making good time to the camping site, but it turned very dark very quickly. We took a rest in the dark as it poured on us in hopes that we would be able to find our headlamps. Once we found our headlamps, we placed them on our heads, still struggling to balance ourselves on top of the rocky and muddy path. I thought by that point we would never make it to the shelter. We walked, never giving up, although I wanted to, as my socks and shoes were wet. I was tired, hungry, drenched, and cold. The temperature had also dropped more than 25 degrees as we made our way up. It was somewhere around 8:30 when we finally made it through to the second shelter and campgrounds. There was a split in the path. Either you could walk straight to continue to the top of the view, which was about 1.5 miles away, or you could turn slightly and make a right on the path and continue up to the campgrounds. Or you could also take a 90-degree turn and walk right down to the shelter. At that point, we were drenched from head to toe and needed to dry off. It was still raining pretty bad, so it would have been nearly impossible to set up our camp and tent. We had decided that we would stay put in the shelter until the rain calmed down. We didn't hear anyone at the shelter, so I was extremely excited to have the place to ourselves and take a few tokes, if you know what I mean. After our hike, I was dead set on it. Once we walked to the shelter and got to the opening, there was a man and a woman in their 60s. We instantly thought to ourselves that they were an older couple who wanted to get away for the weekend too. We told them that we wouldn't be bothering them for long, so we put our backpacks down and attempted to dry off. The couple were very welcoming. With a lantern and an absorbing towel for me to dry off with, my boyfriend and I took our shirts off since they were both carrying a lot of weight in water. The couple seemed very normal, and the man brought a cute dog with him that I enjoyed playing with. We began introducing ourselves with our names and where we were from, and what we were doing out here. They both said they were in their 60s, their names were Joe and Maya, and they were just messing around for the weekend. In between sentences, they were taking large gulps of what looked like to be alcohol in their water pack. They said they were just having fun and met online, which veered off into dropping hints that they were there having an affair. The older woman, who says that she comes from West Virginia, struck me to be very weird. It began with her looks at first, having scraggly, shoulder-length gray hair with circular glasses resting on her face. Her teeth were very dark, nearly covered in a brown film, as if she had been using hard drugs. She wore a pullover, hiking boots, and jean shorts that nearly exposed everything. Joe, on the other hand, was just an average white male, who had gray hair and was just a tad bit overweight. They spoke about their past employments and what they had done in life. Maya said that she was a writer, who I did admire. We continued to exchange information and small talk, since they seemed very friendly. I was in a very bad mood though, and very irritable until I smoked some. My boyfriend and I periodically showed each other our phones to communicate, as we didn't have any service, but we didn't want to say things out loud. We agreed that it was okay to start smoking since they were becoming drunk. They said they didn't mind, but would like to join. I thought it was absolutely insane that they wanted to smoke at that age. The man only took 2 hits, but the woman took many, and she was struggling a lot to even flick the lighter. The guys began their own conversation, and the woman and I veered off on our own as well. The woman began to ask me strange questions, and then told me some sort of story. As she inched closer and closer to me, she would ask me to tell her a story. She grew more and more demanding, saying, "Tell me a story." My boyfriend and I met online, just as they did, so I was going to tell her about the story of how we met. I began the story with, "So you met online, right?" The woman nearly cuts me off and angrily says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said to her, "You all met online, right?" She nearly cuts me off again and then aggressively says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said again, "Earlier Joe said you all met online, didn't you?" She nearly shouts and growls, "Why do you say that?" I wanted to jump away from the conversation quickly, so I asked her, "Well, you're a writer, you said, right? So why don't you tell me about one of your best stories?" The woman suddenly becomes very happy and giggly, and while swirling her hands around her head in the air, she said, "Well, I'm a writer, in my mind." I was extremely confused and creeped out at this point. I honestly just didn't know what to say. I'm the type of person to laugh it off, so that's what I tried to do. She just said she's enjoyed being a writer in her mind. I look over at my boyfriend and Joe's conversation, and it seemed to be as normal as can be. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it from what I could tell, but Maya nearly gave me the chills as she got my attention, getting closer into my face, asking me what I was saying. The problem was I wasn't saying anything.
I was silent, ignoring her. She began talking to herself. She would make very in-depth hand gestures as she spoke to herself, then would ask me what I was saying to her. I just wasn't saying a word, and she would wonder what I was telling her. She would abruptly say, yes, no, maybe, or no way, yeah, it can't wait, huh? It was very weird. As she started to rock back and forth, waving her arms around, she began crossing her legs, holding her arms up in the air above her head. She started to shout, coming out, I'm coming out, I'm coming out. She was nearly talking gibberish. None of this made any sense and was creeping me out. The older man's attention was caught, and he asked her what in the world she was doing. She says, I'm calling out, it's witchcraft. I was nearly high and terrified of all my surroundings. It stormed loudly in the background and was pitch black all around us. A small lamp rested on a beam above our heads in the middle of the wooden shelter. It was very wet and very vulnerable. Everything slowly began to get worse that night. Maya kept slurring her words, and the man demanded she gets in her sleeping bag and sleep. I sat against the wall next to my boyfriend very closely as the man crawled into his sleeping bag, and Maya attempted to put her legs in the sleeping bag but couldn't figure out how it worked apparently. She moved around for a very long time and finally ended up curling up next to Joe on top of her sleeping bag. She was probably freezing as it was 35 degrees by 9:30. Only a few minutes passed and we heard Maya whisper. Maya said angrily, "What did you give me?" She growls again. "What did you give me?" The man finally woke up and demanded, "What?" Maya hits him on his back and yells, "What did you give me?" She jumped up immediately facing us. Her eyes were nearly all black as her pupils were so enlarged. She looked nearly sadistic and yelled at us, "What did he give me?" My boyfriend and I tensed up, nearly losing our minds. She screams, the same thing over and over, even louder. As her voice screeched into my eardrums, she once again turned around to the man, laying down behind him. She slowly whispered into his ear, "Did you give me acid?" It began to run through my mind that he had drugged her, or she was having a flashback of a bad trip. Joe attempted to calm her down, but she was still restless. She laid down for approximately 5 minutes, but Maya immediately sat up. She faced us, with her legs crossed. She stared at us without breaking eye contact for at least 5 minutes. She did this every so often, sitting up staring at us, then laying back down. She would do this repeatedly, so we decided to leave. We finally found our way out as she stared at us for one last time. We pitched a camp as far away as possible, but I remained sleepless that night, in fear Maya would find our tent and crawl into it.
Hi. This happened around August of this year. I'm not sure what we experienced or if there was anything paranormal about it, but here it goes. It's also a bit of a long story, so I do apologize for that. So this took place while we were hiking up to Half Dome. We had a campground about 20 minutes drive away from the trailhead, and the group was composed of me, an 18-year-old male, my uncle, a 32-year-old male, and my uncle's friend. I'll call him D. There were also 2 girls with us, but they're not really relevant to the story. My uncle and his friend are both Christian, so there were no substances consumed that could induce the feelings that I will be talking about. We get to our campsite, set up camp, and go to sleep after eating. We plan to wake up at 4 a.m. and start the hike by 4:30. I randomly wake up at 3:30 a.m., completely wide awake and ready to go. I look out of my hammock, and I remember feeling this odd feeling, as if I were woken up by something. And I remember looking out at the moonlight scene. The moon was very bright for some reason, and thinking to myself it looks like a dream. I lay back down in my hammock, but just cannot go back to sleep. I end up waking up my uncle and our friend at about 3:50 a.m. My uncle says, "Were you walking around last night?" I say no and ask him why. He says he woke up for some reason and can hear someone walking around. Not like an animal, but a person. I say, that's weird, and we try to brush it off. We get to the trailhead at around 4:30 a.m., and as everyone is unloading from the car, D says he's going to use the bathroom, which there are a couple before the trailhead. I walk behind him for some time, before falling behind and waiting for my uncle, who forgot something in the car. The short, straight road from the parking lot runs directly into a T intersection with the road to the trailhead. The bathroom is directly across on the intersection through the field. Those who have been here know exactly what I'm talking about. We get to the intersection and wait for D to come out of the bathroom. We wait for about 10 minutes before I go back and check the bathroom. He isn't there. I get back to my uncle and tell him that. He says, "Weird, maybe he went back to the car or something." We decide to wait a little bit more. By 5:10 we begin to worry. My uncle goes to check the car while I wait at the intersection to make sure we don't miss him if he went down the road away from the trailhead. My uncle returns and says he's not there either. We decide maybe he went up to the trailhead without us, for some reason, and walk up there in about 10 minutes. He isn't there either. We are kind of baffled now, because there are no other logical places he could have went. I decide to run back down to the car and the bathroom again. I meet him halfway before I get to the intersection. He is sweaty and disheveled with a weird look in his eyes. I say, "Where have you been?" He says that he went to the bathroom, and when he got back to the intersection, we weren't there. I say, "What do you mean? We were waiting here this entire time, for over an hour. We checked the car, the bathroom, the trailhead, and you weren't here." He says, "Well, I don't know. I went to the bathroom." He then asks me where my uncle is. I say at the trailhead. He asks me again, and I tell him again. And note that it was weird that he asked me twice. As we're crossing the bridge to the trailhead, he sees a light off on the riverbank and exclaims, "Maybe that's him." And I just look at him and keep walking. I thought his behavior was very strange, like he wasn't thinking straight, like he wasn't all there. We finally get on with the hike, and it goes by as normal, except that we seem to keep on losing things, such as my uncle's small red flashlight and one of the girl's gloves, a water bottle, etc. It's like we just simply forgot about the items and couldn't remember where we left them. On the way back it got pretty dark, and we turned on our flashlights, and as we neared the end of the hike, after the last two waterfalls, it begins to seem as if we were walking for far too long. It feels like we had been walking in circles almost. My uncle also confirms this, asking me, "Doesn't it seem like it's taking way longer to get back?" I say, "Yeah, I was just thinking that." We keep walking, but it still seems like we aren't making any real progress. I've been on that trail many times, and as I was walking, I could not spot any familiar landmarks. It was weird. There was this feeling. It was odd. You could feel it in the air, sort of like a slight menacing feeling. It's hard to describe. I remember thinking, it feels like the woods are alive. We remarked 3 more times about how long the hike is taking and begin to laugh at it because it felt so ridiculous. After a bit longer, we finally and suddenly find ourselves on the final stretch and make it back to the car. Now, all of this seemed very odd at the time, but I just brushed it off. I only realized how weird these events were after the fact. I honestly don't know what to make of all of this. My uncle kind of looks at everything different now, and honestly I look at things different too, but I wanted to share this and see if there were any opinions in the swamp.
Traumatized in the Woods by Fraudulent Flashcards. I spent much time with one set of grandparents in my youth. They watched me while my parents worked all week and kept me all summer at this campground. I had been coming there and staying all summer from the ages of 2 to 13 and have had many fond memories. There is one, however, that has stuck with me over the years. On this particular occasion, I was 6 years old, and my best friend, who was 8 years old at the time, was spending a few days with us at the campground. We only stayed there weekdays since my grandmother worked double shifts all weekend. Therefore, the campground was sparsely populated Monday through Friday, since many people only have off work and camp for weekends or holidays. So there were already eerie vibes there, especially in the darkness, not to mention the ghost stories my dad had told us about the place. Our neighbors in the immediate area were perfect despite barely seeing them. They had a complete outdoor kitchen that I loved playing pretend chef in, and they left it open whenever I wanted and allowed me to play in it. My grandparents were always lovely and easygoing, and my nan was mainly incredibly nurturing to your needs no matter who you were. But they also had moments. Have you ever seen that movie, The Visit? It's kind of reminiscent of that, where it would kind of be like a creepy moment and then kind of go back to normal. My best friend's first day at the campground was when my pop told us to watch out for bears because he had seen one earlier that day. We brushed that off since we had heard things like this all the time, and we were having too much fun riding bikes and going into the creek to really care. Night would soon come, and it would get really dark really fast. My best friend and I are playing in the outdoor kitchen that I mentioned before. Out of nowhere, we hear this low growling and moaning sound, which gets much louder as something begins tearing at the tarp cover, acting as if it was a kitchen wall. We all know that reasoning shuts down the limbic system and overrides during threats of survival. The fight or flight response takes over, if you will. It seemingly happened in an instant. We were running and immediately crying before we could even process what was happening. We run a couple of feet to our camper to get to my Nan. I was expecting her to be comforted as she always was, but her reaction to us was somewhat horrifying. She laughs wildly and practically slaps her knees. Baffled and scared, I had no idea how to react to this. My pop emerges behind the camper next to ours, joins the mad laughter, eyes bugging out. So yeah, my pop pretended to be the bear, but he never really admitted to it, it was kind of weird. So he made up that he had seen a bear earlier in the day to scare us, and then I guess when we didn't, get scared by it, he came and physically pretended to be the bear. At least that's my understanding all these years later. We weren't amused, and I don't remember the rest of that week if I'm honest, but I recall still being terrified and finding no relief in their words. I was scared of them and didn't understand why they did that, and I still really don't. I'm all for pranks and kidding around, but I feel like this was a little beyond, especially because they never said explicitly that they, pranked us. They just acted like it didn't happen, but clearly laughed in our faces about it. I don't know. Everything scared me at that age as well. So I'm not acting like this is some crazy traumatic thing, but they had never done anything like this before or after, and I just found it so weird. They did get a kick out of us two kids running away crying and screaming, I can tell you that. They were definitely holding back tears from laughing so hard. Looking back, I felt like it was alarming. They never really apologized or, even paid much mind to the rest of my friend's stay, but they would laugh heartily whenever we brought this up, I don't know. I'll likely never get any further elaboration from them, but, I thought this would be a cool story to share. Campground Killers by Bubbly Banana. When I turned 13 years a few years back, I invited about 8 friends to go camping with me. The campsite was near a large forest with giant trees and many bushes, and you can already tell where this is going. The campsite was on the water, so we spent the 2 days there swimming, biking, and exploring the woods nearby. On our first day there, we were biking around to the other campsites when we found a group of kids our age. There were about 3 of them. Instead of getting along, we got into a big argument, which caused a war between our 2 groups. At one point, one of the kids in their group threatened to hurt us with his dad's knife. This made us leave and head back to our campsite, as it had deeply disturbed us and made us uncomfortable. That night was pretty typical. We forgot all about those kids and roasted some s'mores. My mom and dad went to bed at about 10 p.m. They were the only supervisors we had on this trip. They told us not to stay up too late or make too much noise or to leave the campground. As we were messing around, I saw something in the corner of my eye. Honestly, it kind of looked like the shape of a human on a tree line near our campsite. I asked my friends about it and told them to look. We decided to look more closely and try to discern what it was. As we approached, we could tell it was a person. The thing is they weren't moving and they were standing dead still. As my friend, for the sake of this I'll call him Matt, said that he was getting uncomfortable, he wanted to try to get next to the figure. He said that he could tell it was a man for sure. We were all perplexed by this, and were kind of scared and didn't want him to try to go confront whoever or whatever this was. My first thought was honestly like, why would anyone put a mannequin out here? I'm trying to figure out some sort of rational reason as to why this person, figure, thing would be standing there so still without making a single noise or movement. As we tried to figure out the answer, we began to hear movement around us, coming from the nearby bushes. We decided to dash back to camp, and once we all made it, we got into our tent and kept watching to see if anyone was coming. There was a point where my friend Brody saw a figure in the tree line moving. I caught a glimpse of it as well, but I'm unsure if it was a person or what it was. We kept taking shifts of sleeping and watching for people. We were tired the following day and decided to check out the dummy. We wanted to see what it was. We saw it gone without a trace as we approached the area. This also disturbed us, as it was about 5 in the morning, meaning someone must have come and taken it very early. We went back to check on the kids we fought with and saw that they were still there. When they saw us coming, they quickly went into their camper and hid. We tried to wait for them, but they wouldn't come out no matter what. Eventually, we gave up and headed back to our site. It was still relatively early. We decided to keep exploring where Brody may have seen a person. What we found next made us all want to leave and never return. In a bush, right next to where Brody saw the figure, was a hunting knife, a pair of binoculars, and a hunting rifle. We assume it was those kids, but how did they get those items if it was? Like, honestly, the oldest kid was maybe 11 years old. The night was pretty normal again until about midnight. We saw more movement in the trees and we knew we had to be careful. We all stayed up and watched as multiple figures made their way through the trees. Eventually, I'm assuming that Matt got mad and decided to open the tent, shine his flashlight and start yelling at whoever was out there. We followed him as he moved closer to the trees and saw there were 2 kids booking it deeper into the woods carrying the items we had found in the bush. After we scared them off, we returned to the tent and the rest of the night was uneventful. Although none of us could sleep that night, and how could we? Nothing more happened, as by the time we checked on the kids the next day, they had already left the campsite with their family. That experience honestly still haunts me, and I wonder what would have happened if we had been vulnerable in those woods that night. I mean, they had a gun and we had a tent. At the end of the day, if they really wanted to do something, they could have. And I think that's what bothers me sometimes. Someone is stalking my land by Blunt 10 Smoke. To give a little backstory, I honestly tend to keep to myself. Except, I have to share this story, because something out of the ordinary is happening to me. I live where it's uncommon to see wanderers or any sort of travelers. I barely see anyone, except for the occasional funeral of an old friend. I like to consider it a safe and peaceful area to rest. However, some occurrences within the past few weeks have made me think otherwise. It all started about a week ago, one warm evening as I was relaxing at home, watching the day go by and listening to the creatures sing their song of nature in the beautiful wooded country I live in. Suddenly, all went quiet. There was not a single bird chirping or a frog croaking. Something felt wrong. I tuned in to see if I could hear or see anything out of the ordinary, straining my ears to its fullest, but to my dismay, everything looked and sounded normal. It was just quiet. I know this doesn't sound off to some of you listening. However, this was just wrong for where I live. There was always noises of nature, always noises of something, whether it be the wind, the bugs, the dirt, even the grass. A few days had passed, and all was normal until I had just finished cooking dinner, and went up to rest for the evening. I was looking out and listening to the song of nature again, and suddenly, you guessed it, absolutely everything went dead silent. I almost brushed it off at this time again, but I started considering maybe it was some sort of predator. And there can be bears and such in the area from time to time, so I wasn't too worried. Once again, as I listened closely, trying to tune into the nature around me, it was eerily silent, almost unbearable, if you will. That was until I heard it. It was a distant chattering sound. I sat and focused for a minute, trying to see if I could pinpoint where it was coming from. Honestly, it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. I waited through another few seconds of silence, and that's when I began to hear leaves crunching like something massive was moving. Living in the country, you can tell the difference between humans, animals, and anything else walking in the woods. This was definitely some sort of human, or at least a bipedal creature. I felt a strike of fear go through me as I nested down and tried to get out of sight. Now, my house is not very assuming, it's built into the woods, can't really notice it unless you pop up on it, I noticed after some time that he came up onto my house, and I noticed he was wearing a strange outfit. It honestly looked like some sort of homemade ghillie suit, like he was trying not to be heard. The chattering stopped, and I noticed whatever this person was doing was making the noise with their teeth. So they were chattering their teeth essentially, which sounds honestly awful. I began to hear a banging sound, and I wasn't really sure what they were doing, but it looked like whatever they had in their hands, they were banging against a tree. I began to kind of squeal in slight fear. As I said, I'm pretty introverted. I'm not really like a super tough guy. I can take care of myself and survive off the land, but confrontation with people is not something I've ever really been that good at. Eventually, they got closer, and I noticed what was in their hand was actually some sort of machete/spear type thing. Honestly, it looked like he had a PVC pipe that he had spray painted and somehow mounted a machete on it. It was pretty janky looking, if I'm honest. This guy noticed me and started shouting at me and doing more of those loud chatters with his teeth. At this point, I began to black out, absolutely terrified. I thought of all the funerals I've attended, all the fallen friends and acquaintances that I have unfortunately had to see over the years, the ones who didn't make it to live the life that I got to live, and in that moment, I decided that I wasn't going to end up quite there. This was not going to be my fate, and today was not going to be my funeral. This guy started charging at me, chattering his teeth, sounding like some sort of alien from a movie. He swung his spear machete thing at me, and it skinned my leg slightly as I was moving out of the way. I honestly was kind of in shock. I had no idea why this person would be charging me or trying to take my life like this. Honestly, all I had was a small .22. I had a .380 somewhere else in the house, but I believe it was broken or jammed. There was something wrong with it and I couldn't figure it out. But my .22 worked just fine. Now, it wasn't ideal. It wasn't going to pack the most powerful punch, but if it bleeds, it dies. So I picked up my .22 that I had laying next to my chair outside, and I just unloaded. Luckily, it seemed like I scared him more than I may have hurt him, because the moment he saw me aiming a gun at him, he began to run. I'm not the type of person that's just going to scatter them with a bunch of bullets, though. I let off a couple shots, intentionally missing them, watching them run in terror away, making a more alarming and distressed chattering sound. The Georgia foothills are strange. By Inner Lab 123. There is a strange old energy throughout the Georgia Piedmont and the foothills of the Appalachians. The area's geography, that which has not yet been consumed by Atlanta's limitless growth, is characterized by dense forest, rolling hills, and shallow red clay valleys punctuated by soft grassy meadows. Silty rivers and small streams crisscross the landscape, often filling the valleys to form lakes and marshes. We are never alone in this forest, not truly, which are densely populated with wildlife of all strata. The region also hosts a sizable human presence, with booming Sunbelt suburbs sprawling endlessly into the ancient hills. As so many people are in a relatively small region, it can feel difficult to escape the hustle and bustle. Well-known trails close to population centers are often crowded, especially on fall weekends when the plentiful trees bloom with autumn color. I've been around long enough to know what hikes to avoid at certain times of year, as solitude is one of the most enticing benefits of the wilderness to me. Plenty of state and natural forest and expansive county nature preserves
forward through the tall grass and down the hill toward the grove at the bottom of the meadow. My pup and I were drawn to the urgency to this off-trail area of the preserve, and soon enough, we were at the trees, taking our first steps into the dim woods. Through the branches ahead, I could see a crumbling red brick chimney standing alone in the brush. It did not appear far away, but as we continued advancing toward it, it took several minutes. It seemed we weren't getting any closer. Suddenly, a giant black snake stopped us in our tracks, positioning itself as if to block us from going any more forward. This is highly unusual behavior for black snakes and just snakes in general, which are normally furtive and keep away from people. This slight shock snapped me out of almost a trance-like state, and suddenly, everything felt wrong. I took it as a sign that we were not welcome in this part of the forest, and no longer wanted to investigate the chimney. It took much longer than expected to get back to the meadow. At this point, I was drenched in sweat and my pup was panting hard, whereas not long ago, we had been enjoying a relatively fantastic summer evening. The meadow was also dark, and when I checked my watch, I saw what we had been off trail for nearly an hour. Everything was silent. No more cicada chirping. I have had similar encounters throughout the region where the laws of space and time seem to be somehow suspended in certain areas of the backwoods. I've considered looking for the chimney again when I have more daylight and time to work with. But then I think about the snake's warning and the feeling of existential dread that I felt that evening. Perhaps some things are not meant to be investigated. I don't know how to express this other than it was lost time and maybe some sort of strange missing 411 type vibe. I would love to know your opinions in the comments.
My Hiking Nightmare in Germany by Content Ground. Hiking alone has been a source of solace for me. The woods with their towering trees and whispering leaves feel like a sanctuary, a place where I can truly unwind and connect with nature. But one particular hike near the French border in Germany turned into an experience I can neither fully explain nor forget. It was a scorching summer day, and I was already on my way back from a long hike. The sun beat down relentlessly, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. As I trudged along the narrow, winding path, a sign caught my eye. It announced a small spring just 200 meters to the left, a spot used for Christian pilgrimage back in the day. They were rebuilt after the famous grottos back in the day. Intrigued and eager for a break, I decided to check it out. The path to the spring was overgrown but inviting, shaded by a canopy of ancient-looking trees. As I approached, I spotted a roebuck gracefully drinking from the water that trickled naturally from a small, moss-covered grotto. The sight was serene, almost magical. I sat down by the edge of the spring, letting the cool water refresh my neck and cheeks. The chill was a welcome relief from the oppressive heat, but I was careful not to drink any of the water. After a few minutes of peaceful rest, I stood up, ready to tackle the last stretch back to my car. That's when everything changed. The forest, which had felt so tranquil moments before, suddenly seemed to shift. An instinctive feeling of imminent danger washed over me, making my heart pound in my chest. I strained my ears and heard a sound, a deep, resonant voice speaking in a strange ancient language. It seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. A sense of urgency gripped me, and I began to walk faster, my senses on high alert. Suddenly, the forest came alive with the sounds of hasty footsteps all around me. They echoed from behind, from above in the trees, like a dozen small creatures were chasing me. Shadows fitted between the trees, but no matter how hard I tried to focus, I could not see what was making the noises. Panic began to set in, and I broke into a run, stumbling over gnarled roots and uneven ground. Minutes felt like hours as I fled the small water grotto, quickly disappearing from view. Just as I thought I couldn't run any further, I heard a deep female voice. It spoke calmly, uttering a few words in an ancient language from somewhere to the left of the track, behind a large weathered rock. Then, as suddenly as it begun, everything just stopped. In the blink of an eye, the forest returned to its normal state. The birds resumed their singing, and a peaceful calm settled over the woods once more. Breathing heavily, I slowed my pace and looked around. Everything appeared as it had before, but I knew something had changed. To this day, I have no logical explanation for what happened. Maybe it was just my imagination, a result of the heat and exhaustion playing tricks on me, or perhaps it was something more. A glimpse into the ancient past of these woods, a place where Christian and Celto-Germanic histories intertwined, leaving behind echoes of an old magic and forgotten rituals. The Special Rabbit by Seraphim. It was the early 1940s, a time when the world was at war, but in the rural heart of Macedonia, life moved to the timeless rhythm of the seasons. My grandmother, just a young girl at the time, was riding a horse alongside her uncle, heading to a nearby village to visit relatives. The path they took wound through a dense ancient forest where the canopy of leaves filtered the sunlight in like a soft green glow. The forest was alive with nature's sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Suddenly, a rabbit bolted across their path. The horse started to have weird jerky movements because of it, reared up on its hind legs and neighing in a panic. My grandmother clung to the horse's mane, her heart pounding in her chest. Her uncle struggled to calm the frightened animal, speaking soothing words and gently pulling on the reins. As the horse slowly began to calm down and come back to some sense of normalcy, the rabbit stopped just a few feet away and turned to face them. To their astonishment, the rabbit did something entirely unnatural. It grinned. Not just any grin, but a wide, unsettling smile that seemed almost inhuman. It then emitted a strange giggling sound, a sound that echoed eerily in the quiet forest. The horse snorted and stamped its feet, still nervous but no longer panicking. My grandmother, as an only child of a priest, was deeply superstitious. The rabbit's bizarre behavior terrified her, and she clung to her uncle, who was equally disturbed but tried to remain composed. The rabbit, after what felt like an eternity, finally turned around and continued on its way, disappearing into the underbrush as if nothing unusual had ever happened. The forest slowly returned to its normal state, but the memory of that unsettling encounter, the fear and the lingering sense of the supernatural, haunted them both. Years later, my grandma would recount this story, her eyes wide with the same fear she felt that day. To her, it was a clear sign of encountering something otherworldly, something malevolent. She believed that the rabbit was a manifestation of the devil himself, a belief that was reinforced by the superstition and folklore of her upbringing. He Met the Devil by Sisel. In the heart of Eastern Europe, nestled between rolling hills and dense ancient forests, lay a small village. The villagers lived simple lives, often reliant on the bounty of the surrounding nature. Among them was my great-grandfather, a sturdy man known for his strong work ethic and resolve. His family, like many others, sometimes had to bend the rules to make ends meet. One cold, moonless night, my great-grandfather decided to venture into the forest to gather some wood. It was a risky endeavor, as taking wood from the forest was strictly forbidden. The authorities were vigilant, and the penalties were severe. Nonetheless, the need to keep his family warm during the harsh winter outweighed his fear of getting caught. As he carefully navigated the dense underbrush, he unexpectedly stumbled upon another villager. It was somebody who knew, somebody by the name of Ivan, a neighbor with a similar predicament. Their shared goal forged an unspoken bond, and they decided to stick together for safety and camaraderie. Time slowly passed by in the quiet, eerie forest. The only sounds were the crunching of leaves underfoot and the occasional hoot of an owl. Suddenly, they caught sight of a small figure in the darkness. Approaching cautiously, they realized it was a billy goat. Its fur was black as the night itself. "Someone must have lost their goat," my great-grandfather murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Ivan nodded in agreement. The thought of fresh meat was too tempting to pass up. They decided to take the billy goat with them, planning to share its meat at a later date. They carefully placed the goat in a large sack. Almost immediately, the sack began to feel heavier. At first, they thought it was just their imagination. But as they trudged through the forest, the weight became more and more burdensome. They had to stop frequently, exchanging the sack between them. "Why is this goat so heavy?" Ivan grunted, wiping sweat away from his brow despite the cold night air. As they continued, the goat inside the sack grew increasingly more restless. It thrashed and kicked, making it harder for them to carry. Finally, my great-grandfather, exasperated, muttered, "Take it easy, Billy Goat." To their utter horror, a strange voice echoed back from the sack, repeating this exact word. "Take it easy, Billy Goat." They froze, their blood running cold. My great-grandfather's hand instinctively went to the gun at his waist. With trembling fingers, he drew it and fired twice into the sack. The shots echoed through the forest, and then there was silence. Cautiously, they opened the sack, expecting to see the lifeless body of the goat. But to their astonishment, there was nothing inside, just thin air. The goat had vanished without a trace. The two men stood there, bewildered and terrified. The weight of their actions and the supernatural encounter left them shaken to their core. They were convinced that they had encountered the devil himself, a punishment for their intent to steal. Word of their harrowing experience spread quickly through the forest. It became a tale of caution, a reminder of the thin line between survival and morality, and the mysterious forces that lurked in the shadows of the ancient forests around them. The Mountains of Norway by Dangleberries. There's this mountain hotel in northern Norway I often go with my family and such. Someone I am related to is the leader or owner of it or something, and my entire family usually goes there for Easter and other holidays. It's located in the middle of nowhere, so it's like an hour, and it takes like snowmobile and all kinds of other vehicles to get there. It's located on a very old Sami ground. Samis are the indigenous people of Northern Europe or something of the sort. Very spiritual people. The hotel and cabin thing was 11 rooms in total, and outside there was this old barn which was the aggregate. The 4 rooms closest to the barn is said to be the oldest. I'll start with some of the less scary stories until the grand finale. I have not experienced any of these myself, even though I have experienced very minor shady stuff there. The first story comes from my cousin. My cousin was out by the toilet door, which was an outhouse, taking a pee in the snow, when he saw another cousin go into the barn, probably to go get wood for the oven. So, when he was done using the bathroom, he decides he's gonna scare him and go to the other entrance and sneak through the long hallway. He notices that my other cousin isn't there anymore, so he thinks maybe he just didn't really see him. He rushes up to go boo around the corner, maybe thinking that he just wasn't seeing him right. But when he jumps in, there was nobody there at all, and there's no way he could have walked by without him noticing. The second story comes from an old friend of mine. He was there with his classmates, and they had, that one girl who's completely silent, always weird, and it was always hard to get her to talk. And he had personally never heard her say a word before. Randomly, out of nowhere, as they were walking by that same area we had just talked about, she started screaming really loud and crying hysterically. She was alone just for like half a second and instantly burst into tears. She said that there was some sort of imaginary figure that we couldn't see behind her, brushing her hair, and it was some sort of old man in the mirror behind her. The third story is when there was a man that I met who told me about one time when he was there alone with his dog. They slept in the room closest to the living room. In the middle of the night, they heard something that sounded like a Same ceremony, and some sort of dancing and man-made drums. He said he heard a lot of weird stuff. It sounded like there was a whole party or ceremony going on. The dog was staring at the wall with his ears pointed up the whole night, and he said he didn't sleep a wink. The fourth story, there was a family that was there alone for a weekend. They were just camping and enjoying the time when they heard a woman moaning and crying out in the woods. By the way, this is very far from anybody, I'm pretty sure I explained, so there should be nobody out there. The next day, they actually found out that a woman died in the parking area, and she had been there for quite a few weeks before they even got there. So maybe they heard her spirit weeping. This last story is one that I had heard from many different people over the years. They all had the same details though, and that's why I believe it. There was a 10th grade class who went there in the summer. At nighttime, some of the guys were sitting there and talking next to the window. This room is closest to the barn and to the woods. 2 guys were talking by the window, and one guy was trying to sleep, until they heard this girl moan really painfully. In my friend's words, it was as if she was getting assaulted. He said the sound was extremely loud and startling, like something he had never heard before, but he seemingly instantly felt he knew it was somebody in trouble. They instantly got up and ran outside down towards the lake down a small hill. They didn't see anybody, but they could hear noises, and they seemed to be coming from deep within the woods across the lake. They were all freaked out about it. They all reported it, but nothing really ever seemed to happen. I'm not sure what was going on, and none of us are really sure what's going on in this area. But those cabins, those woods, that whole nature preserve, there's something wrong with it.
I went on vacation in Northern Europe with my grandfather, as he had taken people there before. When I left the States, I did some research on the mythicism of the people. A generous preponderance of it was concerning trolls, and so I did an expansive investigation touching on the topic of trolls. I listened to the podcast of Swamp Dweller and others. Anyway, my grandfather was remarkably kind, and when I requested to investigate Troller Gil, he granted it without equivocation. We had countless fun experiences while in the United Kingdom. Resting in peace, Grandpa. Anyhow, on the route to Appletreewick, we stopped at Tesco petrol station. We convened a couple of quite charming chaps there, one appearing to be somewhere in their mid-30s, and the other looking somewhere in his 60s. The more youthful fellow had ginger hair and was wearing a corduroy parka. The mature individual possessed a full head of lustrous silver hair and had an extremely crisp Norwegian accent. They inquired where we were going. I simply replied, Troller Gil. The more adult one shifted to the ginger and his peepers went wide. The redhead discerned that he was surprised that we would be going there, and his eyes went wide. The pair then both stared at me and my grandpa with shock. The old guy said something about a dog beast in German, and the other looked to my grandfather and declared, Troller Gil is shamed for the devil dog brute. Anyone who beholds him perishes shortly after. We both presumed he was ribbing, and I understand it seems cliche, but I was honestly sort of creeped out. But I downed a strawberry Miranda in the truck, which set me in a kindred spirit. Once we arrived, I spontaneously sensed an uncomfortable, eerie presence. The presence of an omnipotent presence. We advanced along the path, and I began to overhear some echoing, clanging clamors up ahead. We continued moving along and hiked up to the summit of a large hill. We sat there and let dew soak into the rear of our trousers, and snacked on granola, taking occasional swigs of our Red Bull. We took in the view of the Grand Chasm, and the fragrance of moist earth, moss, and fungi we inhaled with contentment.
The light, barely lucid fog sent along with the essence of stone and cold rain. The tempestuous storm clouds refine the sunlight of the setting day star through themselves, tinting the cumulus bodies of deep, brilliant azure. My sagacious grandfather understood and discerned this to be the mark of dusk, and clarified to me that it was growing late. We did not possess any watches amidst us, or any device concerning time for that matter. We had left them behind in the truck as a way to get away from those things. We coveted the lavish impact of this sight I had been so eager to experience. We just hunkered down there for a few more moments. We both grasped the truth that we ought to leave shortly, but we both wordlessly chose to relax there for just a few more minutes. My stare trailed up from the crevice up to the elegant sky. As I was mounting up the resolution to indicate that we had to get on our way, my prepubescent brain did not want to leave. As I transcribed this, I realized that it presumably had to do with the pubescence and more of the repugnant entity toying around amidst my subconsciousness. While we irrevocably got up and started preparing to leave, we both heard what sounded like a howling. We both gazed down into the crevice, and then overheard a hushed growl, much closer to our position. I peered into the mysterious chasm, the surging, writhing umbra taunting me, spurring my hormone-ridden cerebrum. I was frozen in terror. I underwent profound coercion to attend my grandfather, and the moment I did, he cried out in fear. He pointed down to the gorge, and I looked downhill. I didn't detect anything, yet still, the petty child within me was even more panicked as I observed my tough old grandpa getting that frightened. And, not being there for him, nearly simultaneously, my grandpa and I bolted, and at that instant, it seemed like he was running quicker than me. As we ran along the trail, the clinking and clanking accompanied us at a comfortable pace, almost like the beast was tantalizing us. Now, tears began streaming down my face, seemingly burning my cheeks. I glanced at my grandpa, and he glanced at me. We were both scared out of our wits. We made it to the security of our truck. My soft weeping drastically converted into heavy sobbing. Once I was done with my tearful sitting, the flesh below my eyes was stinging so sorely that I felt like a weeping anew. According to my grandfather, there were amazingly extrinsic tear streaks under my eyes, a dull maroon edge on a formless path, the body of the line paler than my skin hue. When I spoke to him regarding our encounter, I inquired about what he was pointing at in the gloomy chasm. He told me these exact words, and I quote, "A dark-furred wolf, as heavy as a bear, with tusks like a hog and fangs like a viper. His eyes were broad saucers charged with fire, and his embers stung me." As he uttered this description to me, it was almost idyllic. For some reason, his words had an immeasurable effect on me. I don't have a photogenic memory, but for some reason I can recite the complete bit off the top of my head every single time, with no consideration or hesitation, like the place had a lasting mark on me. I might go back there someday. I can't grasp what I will do. There were only 2 material things I took home with me from that monster, but you surely couldn't label it as evidence. A tear in my beloved sweater. Now, I normally go with the flow, but for some reason, it made my heart stop. I suddenly broke into a cold sweat. I originally noticed it when I was on the way back. I was tensely fiddling with the finger breadth of my attire. It was dark at this point, and I was doing everything I could to hold my gaze away from the ditches on the side of the road. My imagination was waiting for me there, with a knife behind its back. I sensed something burning me, and I tore my hand away from the sweater. I noticed a tear, and I somehow associated it that it was ripped with teeth. Not hominid teeth, but something sharper. My grandfather didn't discern my pain. It was dark, and he was concentrating on more significant matters like driving. The other item was driven into the sole of my shoe, a rusted black link from a chain. I don't understand the importance of this article, but I believe there is something peculiar concerning it. Thank you, Swamp, for sharing my story if you do.